political philosophies, practical policy orientations that are operative in our generation, which is more complicated than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and so forth. The second thing is, in doing so, to underscore once again a theme that is near and dear to objectivism, which is that philosophy is upstream from politics, and that when you really push differences over practical policies, often they are deep and significant, but deeper than that and giving rise to most of them are different political philosophies. So I'm going to stress that theme as much as I can. Now, but as Bill mentioned in the introduction, we've spent a lot of time, justifiably so, over the course of the last century and a half, defending liberty against the left and various forms of leftism. That's still an ongoing battle, but conservatism has been on the defensive. It's been shut out of much of academic and intellectual life for the past century or so, while leftism was on the rise, but it is again having a moment, and it has learned from the past century, and it has evolved. And so I'd like to sort out some of the distinctive features of the new conservatisms as well. Now again, I want to start with some data, data on the liberal side of the equation. Here we have a 2x2 chart, amount of economic freedom measured across the bottom. This will be things, protection for property rights, religious toleration, all of the various dimensions and so on. Social scientists are doing wonderful work there. And then the vertical axis is a productivity measure, and the best social science that we have right up to this point is consistently showing, that there's a correlation between freedom, particularly economic freedom, and prosperity. So if you are interested in economic prosperity, then the conclusion is you should have freedom, and freedom will generate that economic prosperity. So this has a whole bunch of countries on the map, representative ones. The ones that are freer are richer. The ones that are moderately free are poorer. The ones that don't have much economic freedom are the poorest of them all. So then the question is, where is my country? Where would I like my country to be? And if I want it to be richer, then I have to do what the currently richer countries are doing. Another chart. Not only are the countries that are economically freer becoming richer, they're able to sustain larger populations. So the world as a whole is getting richer, and we're able to enable more and more people to live that good life. Even the countries that are still relatively poor by 21st century world standards are doing a lot better than those countries were doing 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and so on. So this is the social sciencey data, economic history data, and most of us are familiar with this. We see these charts popping up on a regular basis. And the question that we have then is, when we look at all of this data, we are convinced, or something close to it, that economic freedom and freedoms more generally are a good thing, and we're puzzled why we are still having to have knock down, drag them out arguments over whether liberalism is a good thing or not. And very often, depending on where we are in the world, we do demographic assessments, and we find out that we are in the minority of people who are advocating for economic freedom or freedom more generally. Majority of people are still in favor of various other kinds of political philosophies. And so we try to hammer the data at them. And this is partly one of the things that highlights the importance of philosophy, because in many cases how people interpret the data, whether they are interested in the data at all, is driven by their prior philosophical commitments. And we do know, partly one of the things Isadora was talking about yesterday, people have powerful filters in place before they come to practical data assessments, and philosophy does provide filters in many cases that filter out good data, so there's a philosophical cognitive problem at work there. So we can just give data about liberalism, and then the question comes, how do we justify liberalism based on all of this data? What do we do with it? How do we more formally construct the arguments? Now, when we are talking about freedom and liberty more generally, we have a network of things that this is more of an exercise in political philosophy or political science. What distinguishes liberal political systems from others? And we start talking about things like the rule of law, so that there are principles that are enunciated, that the governing bodies have to abide by, rather than it being the rule of men is the contrast, where whoever the government is, they have the right to just, or at least the authority to make up whatever rules they want. We're putting limitations on the power of government, explicitly saying governments can do certain things, but no more. And all of those things have to be justified in terms of their liberty protecting abilities, property rights being an important one, democratic and republican institutions in some combination or other, having a constitution that makes these things explicit, it's written down, right, rather than just being vaguely part of the culture. Free markets as an expression of people being free in their lives more generally, but certainly in their economic activities are going to be a consequence. And then, since not everything in life is directly economic, we have rights in other areas of our life. So liberty is encompassing value. So this is a description of the kinds of institutions that liberalism prizes and says are appropriate. And if you put those in place, you will get the good results that the charts ahead of time will emerge. Now, within liberalism, though, this is now connecting in part to Martin's talk just a little bit earlier, we still have a lot of debates about how we take the data, how we take our understanding of what a liberal political regime would look like, and construct then a justification of liberalism. So we can describe it, but why that description, we should put that into practice, why we should take that as an ideal rather than just as a description of one possibility. There are a plethora of arguments. So what I want to do is walk through the range of liberal opinion, and I want to do it in a more synthetic fashion. And what I mean by the synthetic fashion will emerge, that there are more things that bind the people who are in favor of liberty than separate them, although the separations do matter. So suppose we say, let's take this understanding of what it is to have a liberal society, that network of liberal institutions. What would make that good? So we're moving from a description to a normative judgment about putting that description into practice or realizing that description. And one answer is to say that way of doing politics is good because it increases the amount of freedom that individuals have. So we think individual freedom is the good that we are striving to achieve. And the way to get that is by having a certain institutional arrangement that will increase the amount of liberty that people have. Now, what we are doing when we make this kind of argument is then to say that before we come to do politics, we need to have some conception of what the good life is. We need to have a morality in mind. And our conception of morality is to say that freedom is a value for individuals. And then when we turn to social issues and political issues, we're asking, how are we going to arrange those so that we can maximize that particular value? And then we are making a descriptive claim, a causal claim, that this set of institutions will lead to more freedom. And that's how you get from an is to an ought in the political regime. And that's a powerful argument if you are convinced that individual freedom is already a good. But what if you're not? What if you say that freedom is good, but why is freedom a good? And you say freedom has to be good and it has to be justified by some other things or things that freedom itself leads to. So liberal institutions might lead to more freedom, but what does more freedom lead to? And maybe those are the values that we are more seriously interested in. And so one of the kinds of arguments that starts to occur there is to say, well, let's have these liberal institutions and then people are going to be freer, but how will people who are freer act? And one thing we will say is they will then be incentivized to act more differently than they will act if they don't have freedom. So if we think about slaves, slaves don't have much of an incentive to act very well in the productive sphere. They'll do what they have to do if they're ordered by the master, but only a minimum amount. Free people are psychologically different, right? Because they know that if they work hard, then they're going to get to keep the rewards of their working hard. So then we have a network of causal relationships. These institutions will give people a lot of freedom. Those people, then their psychology will change. They will be incentivized to think and act a certain way. They're going to work hard, and hard work leads to material wealth. So what makes liberalism good is that it increases prosperity. And we've just given a cause and effect argument for how that does. And notice now that what we are saying is not that individual freedom is good a priori, or good as a deontological principle, or good as a prior principle that we already know is good and justified. It's good because it leads to this, and this is the thing that we are really interested in. We want to be rich, or we want to be richer, and liberalism is going to get you there. Now, a related kind of argument is to say, well, yeah, it's true that people do work harder, but you don't really get rich primarily from working hard. There's lots of people who work hard who don't get particularly rich. What we need to focus on is the fact that human beings are a cognitive species. We're a smart species. So what we have to do is ask, how do people who are free think, and then, of course, act on the basis of their thinking? And the important thing here is that people then will be more willing to think about their economic circumstances and to sort out their various things, but people are going to know different things. And because we're free, we're going to be interacting with each other and developing knowledge-sharing institutions and trading, and to divide the labor in various ways because you know some things that I don't know and I know some things that you don't know. So free people are going to do all of this free market-y kind of stuff with respect to their knowledge. But just as there's a division of labor, there's a division of cognitive labor, and we find ways to coordinate physical labor, we find ways to coordinate our cognitive labor. But because we're smart, a smart species, and knowledge really is perhaps the most important value of all, what's really good about liberalism is that it allows for all of this knowledge acquisition in a dispersed economy, different minds that are out there, but coming together in free cognitive markets and then free physical markets. And so as a result of that, we develop all sorts of win-win trading networks, from industry associations to stock markets and so forth. And it's because we develop all of those very sophisticatedly, that's why we become rich. Other kinds of economies, they don't allow the dispersed knowledge to work. I'm the monarch, say. It's only my knowledge and my beliefs that count, and everything that happens in the economy depends on my knowledge. Right? By contrast, in liberal economies, we've got millions of people, each with their own knowledge. They can act on it, put it together in various ways, and so we're going to become richer. Or the problem with socialism is maybe we only allow 12 people who are at the top of the socialist planning board. It's their knowledge that gets coordinated, and the whole economy has to act on the basis of just those 12 people's knowledge. But that's not the same as millions and millions of people, all with their own knowledges, getting put together in various ways. So, yeah, we are going to work hard, but the really important thing is that liberalism allows people to work smart, and to work smart socially, and that's why those economies become richer. Okay. Now, variation argument, is this the one I want? To say, well, yeah, this is important and this is important, but maybe the more important thing is that if you have individual rights protected, then how are people going to behave? Well, they're going to behave more as individuals, do their own thing. And yes, we're all human beings, but we're all also different in terms of our capacities, our interests, the things that we become really good at. So a liberal society is going to be a very diversely individualistic society with lots and lots of experiments in life. And out of that, we're going to get a lot of creativity and innovation. And if we really want to know what drives an economy, it's not necessarily lots of people working hard, that's important. It's not even necessarily lots and lots of people with their knowledge, coordinating their knowledge, because maybe a lot of people are adding some value, but they don't really know very much, so the value that they're adding is minimally. What really drives an economy is the people who are creative, who do the innovation, and they do outsized increases to a group's productivity. So maybe everybody is adding to the economy, but some people add a whole lot more to the economy. And it's these hyper individualistic, creative, sometimes off the charts, eccentric people in various ways. So it's those guys. And so then we might then say, well, actually, it's all of them, right? People work harder, they work smarter, we have a whole lot more innovation. No other kind of social organization can do that, and this is why liberal economies are the most productive. But stepping back, again, what we have is instrumental arguments here. We're saying the institutions lead to freedom, but the freedom is justified because it makes us all individually and socially more rich materially. Now, we might not say that material wealth just by itself is making a whole bunch more stuff. It's the goal. This thing seems to be flopping around, is that right? No, it's okay? All right, thanks. Maybe what matters is not just being more productive, but we also have to ask who gets the results of that productivity. So we're interested in questions of production, but also we're in questions of distribution. And if production is for the sake of distribution, then ultimately it's the distribution questions that are going to be answering our question of what justifies an institution. So who gets the stuff? Well, we might say, well, we're very optimistic. We think everybody is going to be better off if they are in these kinds of societies. So the wealth is going to get distributed universally. Now, we might be not quite so optimistic. We might say, well, the majority of people in a society are going to be better off. We might then say, well, I don't know, according to liberalism, you're going to have a lot of freedom, but what if my individuality is I really want to just be a lazy guy, sit around and read philosophy books, right? And I'm not really interested in being very productive. Well, it doesn't sound like liberalism is going to be making me better off, right? But maybe I'm just a minority member of society, and what we're really looking for is not something that's going to be just making absolutely everybody better off, but the majority of people who are going to work in some way, shape, or form. Or we might say, as we sometimes see, what liberalism does is it makes the average person better off. So the average goes up. All right, now this is teasing, right? These are slightly different formulations, but it's worth paying attention to them because they can have some consequential differences. We might also say the really important thing is, we can kind of understand richer people or people are going to get richer, and certainly the rich, the smart people, the people who are willing to work hard. But really what we're interested in is the poorest people in society. And the mark of a society improving is, does it not only benefit the rich and the middle class, but also the poorer class? And so we're going to make an argument that there's going to be more jobs available for people who are poorer. There's going to be a society that encourages people to be entrepreneurial, and poorer people can be entrepreneurial. And in contrast to any other society, if you are poorer, what you really want is a liberal society, because then that gives you the best chance to increase your material circumstances. We might also argue that in a rich society, there's going to be more excess money created that makes people more able to be philanthropic. And once people have looked after their own goals financially, they're much more willing to help out other people. So if there are parts of an economy or parts of a society that can't be driven by profit considerations and monetary trade considerations, that we need some charity, we need some philanthropy, if that's what you are really interested in, all of those subsections of society, then what you want is a society that increases a huge amount of wealth. So that's going to increase your likelihood of generating the philanthropy that you think is very important. And so as a result, maybe there are going to be a certain number of people in a society who can't work, right? They can work and be poor, but they can't even reach that threshold. They have physical or psychological issues or whatever happens, and we want to make sure that those people still get looked after. So liberalism has those people covered too. And that is another goal we might argue for. Now, then we can jump to the other end of the social spectrum, so to speak, and say the thing that makes capitalism here being the economic portion of liberalism, right, more broadly, so wonderful is primarily, now I'm putting the word primarily out there, that it's the best people in society. So that wealth gets spent on things that elevate us as human beings. We can support huge numbers of artists and musicians and opera and symphony and concerts that are world tours. You think how much wealth it takes to take a 60-piece orchestra and send it on a world tour. That's not going to happen in a poor society. Sports, athletics, and we all love to watch human beings performing physically at their best at the Olympics or the World Championships. You're going to get more people able to do athletics at the highest level. And again, that's a very expensive operation, all of the science and technology that goes into making the human being the best that they can possibly be. So if you want all of the best things, and to be able to support the kinds of people who have the capacity for doing things that astonish and make us happy to be human beings, then you're going to get more of those people in this kind of society. Now, that's to talk a lot about money, right, and wealth. Other kinds of arguments we might say to justify liberalism or to say, well, look, the important thing is liberal institutions make people freer. When people are freer, they're more able to be themselves and to develop themselves and become the best kind of individuals that they can possibly be. And if you're interested in human happiness, the fact is, and this is a claim, right, that would be made here, you're not going to be happy if you don't develop yourself, develop your individuality. If you, so to speak, put yourself on hold and start living your life according to other people's agendas. That does not set you up for happiness. If you genuinely want people to be happy, and yes, we're all human beings, and some of the same things make us all happy, but those have to be customized, individualized, and in some cases there are great differences in the particular things that make us happy as individual human beings. Only a society that gives people a lot of freedom to cultivate their individuality is going to be able to generate lots of people who are able to live a happy life. That's going to be different from a dutiful life or an obedient life or a life where you are literally cannon fodder for some other people's agenda and so on. We might add an aesthetic criteria. We might make the argument, go to poor places, go to another poor place, go to another poor place. They all start looking the same. It's kind of boring. Go to a place that's rich. And they all have their uniqueness and they're spectacular and they're innovative and so on. They're a lot more interesting. There's a lot more going on, a lot more interesting people, a lot more art, a lot more events of a cultural nature. So whatever that means, an interesting place to you, right? We're all going to have our unique aspirations there. You're going to get a lot more of that in places that are rich. Life was boring in poverty. What about the things that have typically caused human beings to hate each other, divide each other, leading to outright conflict? Let's put say religion at the top of the list historically for now. What happens if you have a set of liberal institutions and a culture that says it's important that people be free to live their own lives, to be self-responsible, and you have these institutions protecting their right to do so, and then we focus just in on, say, religious issues? Well, the immediate implication is going to be, if you believe in individual rights, then you believe in people's individual right to think their own thoughts and act with respect to religious matters. And that is going to then lead to an increase in toleration with respect to religion. By contrast to any sort of political system that says your individual freedom to practice religion as you think is not that important. There are some things that are more important. Perhaps religion is a state matter, and so it has to be coercive, right? And we're all part of the same state, so we all have to have the same religion, and we don't have any culture of respecting individuality. Well, you're not going to get tolerance out of that. Instead, what you're going to get is what has often happened in the history of religion, the opposite of that. So if you are interested in religion and you want you and everyone else to be able to practice or not practice religion as they judge best, then we've got the right political system for you. And of course, it's going to be more peaceful, which is another value we could add there. What if in more contemporary times we say, well, women are individuals too, people of other races are individuals too? Easy implication of liberalism in general is to say, well, these people are all individuals, we're all human individuals, all human beings should have the same freedoms, and so sexism is stupid and wrong, right? Racism is stupid and wrong. And if we push on the stupid part, we can say, as part of liberalism's working its way out, it's going to incentivize people not to be sexist and not to be racist if we focus on just, say, I've got this arrow coming from profit motive. So suppose we say, liberal institutions, people are free. I really want to make a lot of money in my business. So I've got this business going, and now I need to hire someone. What kind of person do I want to hire if I am a greedy, profit-seeking businessman? I want to hire the person who is going to do the best value added for my company so that I can make more profits. Now, suppose I also happen to be an old-fashioned racist kind of guy. Right? Let's do the sexism first. Suppose I'm an old-fashioned sexist kind of guy, right? And I'm hiring for one position, and some guy out of college is applying for the job, and he got a C average in his grades, very mediocre. But he's a guy, and the other applicant is a woman. A woman just graduated, and she's crackerjack, straight A's, right, in all kinds of activities and so on. So if I am a profit-seeking, greedy capitalist, and I look at these two applicants, it's really obvious which one is going to add the most value to my business, right? It's the young woman, so obviously I'm going to hire her. But maybe if I have some sexist attitudes in me, part of me is going to say, but I don't really want to hire her. I would prefer to hire this guy because he's a guy. Right? So I'm going to have a tension within me. But the point here is going to be that it's the liberal capitalism in me that's going to incentivize me to overlook my sexism or to set it aside or to readjust my sexist attitudes in order to hire the person who in this case really deserves to get the job. Same thing with respect to racism. Suppose I'm doing business internationally, right? I'm trying to sell stuff, right? And some person with a different skin color comes to me and says, we want to buy $2.4 million worth of your product, right? And suppose I've got some latent racist attitudes in me. I say, oh, well, secretly to myself, I don't like the color of this person's skin. Well, then I've got a conflict. I really want your $2.4 million, right? But I'm not comfortable dealing with people whose skin color is different from mine. Well, what's going to give me an incentive to override my racism if I have it? It's obviously this profit motive. So you're going to have more people who are willing to set aside, rethink their racism and their sexism because they're in an economy that is structured this way. So it's going to, as a matter of principle, teach people to respect people as individuals and incentivize them to interact with each other on the basis of doing so. And just one more, partly because I'm running out of space on this chart. Liberalism leads to more international peace. One line of argument we can make is to say, look, all of this dispersion of knowledge, all of these trade networks, people trade across international borders, the more free and capitalistic their societies they are, right? Globalization, that cliche, right? The internationalization of capital markets. So as these mature, then we develop an economy that is an integrated international economy. So I might be in the United States, but my suppliers of my raw materials, say, are in Asia. So I'm importing all of this stuff from Asia. Foreign policy issues between my country and those Asian countries might be a little bit tense. Do I want to go to war with those people? Chances are good that I'll say, no, as a businessman, I don't want to go to war with those people, because first thing that's going to happen when we go to war is I'm not going to be able to get my raw materials from there. That's going to damage my business. So I'm going to be on the side of saying, let's try to sort this out through diplomatic reasons, right? And that's going to incentivize more peace. And it might be that I'm getting my raw materials from Asia, but I'm selling to the European market. So all of my customers are in Europe. I don't want to go to war with any European nations, because then I can't do business. So the profit motive of the argument here is going to incentivize international peace. And then the historical claim will be made that, you know, if you look at the nations that are the most liberal, they typically don't go to war with each other. It's very hard to find cases of that. By contrast, societies that are not liberal and capitalist, they very frequently go to war with each other. Right? So we have a whole network of arguments here. And now I want to put some names to it. Of course, objectivism with Rand emphasizes this part of the argument. Before we do politics, we've already done our moral philosophy, and that has generated a certain understanding of what it is to be a human being. You are an individual. Life requires that you're able to think, act on the basis of your judgment. Survival requires a certain measure of social freedom. So when we are turning to this question of liberal institutions, right, this is already what we are, the justification for whatever kind of institutions we're going to come up with. So liberal institutions are already justified on the basis of an ethical philosophy. Milton Friedman, sometimes he says he's separating economics from ethics, but in practice, he is a very strong moralist, and he is typically emphasizing this argument. It's good to be rich. We want more people to be rich. And the only way you can get rich is if people are willing to work hard, and people are not going to work hard if they are not incentivized. Incentives matter. That's a basic axiom in economics. So what kind of social arrangements are going to incentivize people? The profit motive is the best one that we have been able to discover historically. So if we think poverty is bad and material wealth is good, that's a value judgment. Then we work back to justification for this. But this is then becomes an instrumental value, not an end in itself from this perspective. Friedrich Hayek, following Mises, developing it further, tends to work this territory here. We're all individual, we all have our own knowledge bases, we find ways to coordinate our knowledge, we build up sophisticated markets. That's why liberal market institutions. Adam Smith also famously was the first one to start working on the profit motive one. It's not from the benevolence of the butcher that we get our daily meat, that famous quote from Wealth of Nations. Joseph Schumpeter with his thesis of creative destruction. Innovation drives an economy, and what innovation does is typically destroy the older, less efficient, more bureaucratic organizations, but we have to get rid of those ones to make way for the new ones that are more efficient, more productive. That's what innovators do. So this is what we should be celebrating. Ludwig von Mises, when I read him, I see him at different points saying different things. Sometimes he uses the language that capitalism elevates all of us. It's a very strong claim. Sometimes he says capitalism, it's a more utilitarian. It's like the greatest wealth increases for the majority of people in a society. Not necessarily everybody, but the vast majority are going to be better off. Sometimes he uses the language of the common man as his standard. De Juvenal is an example of elevating the best human beings, whatever your standard is for the best artists, the best musicians, the best scientists, the best athletes, the best adventurers, the human beings who elevate us and make us proud to be human beings, because they show us a path and encourage us to elevate ourselves as much as we possibly can. John Stuart Mill typically emphasizes the importance of individuality. If you're going to be happy, you have to be an individual. He's an Englishman. The English love their eccentrics. You should cultivate your eccentricity. A good society is going to be one that encourages not conformity, but people to do their own thing and experiment with lifestyles. And that makes society not only more interesting, but it makes us all individually more happy. John Locke, with his famous essay, Letter on Toleration, was the first to argue that liberalism is essential to solving the terrible problem of religious hatred and religious conflict and religious repression and religious war that had been dominating recent European history. Liberalism is the solution to that particular problem. Now, others, various other ones, but for time considerations, I want to pull out all of the arguments that I have made here. What makes liberalism good? What justifies it? And we have a long list of value claims here. The important thing is to notice that these are all value claims. And this is connecting with Martin's talk. There's sometimes an interpretation of a lot of the liberal thinkers that says they are making amoral arguments. They're not making moral arguments. But every single argument that we have made so far is a value judgment argument. Is to say, here is some important value. And it might be even a moral principled value, and we should be organizing society to achieve that value or to maximize that value. We want people to be free. We want people to work hard. Right? Being lazy is bad. Working hard is good. Right? It's a value judgment. Innovation is good. Coordinating and working together and developing social networks that benefit all of us. That's the good thing we're looking for. Being richer is good. Everybody being better off is the standard that we are striving for. We want people to be happy. We want people to be tolerant. We want an interesting society. Aesthetically, we think sexism and racism are bad, and liberalism is going to decrease the amount of those in society. We want civil institutions, toleration, and various other things. And we want a peaceful society. Now, this then is to say, within the camp of people who are committed to liberalism, right, we have a lot of diversity over what exactly it is about liberalism that justifies it. Now, I want to make a transition and say, that's very interesting. It's one of the reasons why objectivists and libertarians and classical liberals of various sorts try to find it hard to get their act together and present a unified movement, a lot of internal debates. But I would put it to you that almost all people who are in that camp, objectivist libertarians, classical liberals, and so on, will agree with pretty much everything on this list. They'll say, yeah, all of those things are good, and liberalism delivers on all of them, or pretty much all of them. And the disagreements are at a second order. Which of those is the really most important one? Is it really that toleration is more important than material wealth, or is material wealth more important than the pursuit of happiness? Is individual freedom already justified before we do politics, or is it downstream from a justification of politics? And that's interesting and that's important, but I now want to turn to the opposition. As mentioned before, we're going to set aside the left. We've spent a lot of time arguing with them. I want to focus on especially the new conservatives, but first what makes the new conservatives new. because they are having a cultural moment, they're having a political moment, and increasingly it is their intellectuals and especially their philosophers who are coming to the fore. And one of the things that we know about the left is that it was its philosophical strategists that set the direction for its successes and its failures in the 20th century on into the 21st century. The same thing is starting to happen for the conservatives. So, what is conservatism? Just want to say that almost every political philosophy is a network of more basic claims about aspects of politics. So, one of the big questions that conservatives always put to themselves and to other people is the status of religion. So how important is religion to your political worldview? Are you willing to say as a conservative that religion of some shape or form is necessary, or is it the case that it has to be my particular religion? And if you do any of the other religions, that's ultimately going to be a political disaster. So 2 questions about religion. The principles, do they apply to everyone? So if we think about religions, for example, some religions say our religion is universal in scope. There's one religion that's true for everyone. Other religions talk about being a chosen people. Our religion is true for us. You might have your religion, though. There are different religions, and that's going to be fine. Do we think that politics is about principles that are firm, general, and to be applied, or is politics a more practical, pragmatic, rules of thumb, we need to be more flexible kind of discipline? And conservatives vary on that one as well. Another important element of conservatism is, this is where the name comes from, that the emphasis should be on conserving the traditions that constitute our society. And as a result, we are going to be resistant to changing our traditions or changing our traditions too fast. Now, all of those elements, you'll recognize them in isolation, but let's put them to some concretization. I'm going to call this old-style conservatism or paleo-conservatism. And some members of this movement call themselves paleo-conservatives. And we are interested in old-style conservatism. What we mean by that is we have to start with religion. Religion is absolutely necessary to moral philosophy, to all of philosophy, and then downstream to political philosophy. First, we have the religion, and politics is a matter of bringing that religion and its worldview into reality in the city of man. So the city of God needs to be instantiated in the city of man. Not only that, traditional or paleo-conservatives will be particularist. It's their religion that is the true one. It is Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism. And the others might have some virtues to them, but they include important falsehoods, so it has to be our religion that is the one and only. It's universal, speaks to all. Our principles are absolute. They are rules, they are commands. This is not advice from God. This is God's will. You follow it to the letter. And we should revere our traditions. Who are we 3,000, 2,000 years after the fact with our puny intellects to challenge the wisdom of the ages, the wisdom of God as captured in scriptures? So we should revere our traditions, and rather than changing things and saying we're future-oriented and we're going to be revolutionary, we should keep things the same as they are, right? Or maybe even better, go back to better times before the sinfulness and the corruption of modernity and other kinds of political systems came along. So let's take that as a 6-dimensional statement of what old conservatism stands for. And I want to quickly go through 4 leading contemporary conservatives. Chances are good you will recognize all of their names, and that all of them believe very little of this. But nonetheless, they are conservatives, they are prominent, they are the ones with the biggest followers, they're the ones we're going to be having the arguments with over the next generation. So here's one. Everyone heard of Jordan Peterson? I imagine so, yes. Okay. Now, he is a mixed case when it comes to practical political levels. He has a lot of liberalism in him and a lot of conservatism in him. He sometimes is speaking of praise of modernity and the Enlightenment. At other points, he is critical and condemnatory of elements of it. But the signature element of his package, his kind of conservatism, is not to say that he thinks it is true, but rather that it is psychologically useful to human beings. He is a psychologist first and foremost, from his own personal experience, from his research, from his practicing therapy practice. The argument he makes is about religion and myths more generally is not that they are true historically, that they are true metaphysically, that they are true physically, but that nonetheless they are stories that we tell ourselves. They are narratives. And when we start telling this or using the language of narratives, we're backing away from the issue of truth. So you take any biblical stories, and part of Jordan Peterson's rise to fame was his long various series on religious texts, particularly Judeo-Christian religious texts. And at no point in any of those series or any of his formal public reflections on that does he say that any of these stories are true. All of his work is to say this story presses a human's psychological button, or that there are archetypes, perhaps Jungian archetypes, that are built into the human condition. And listening to these stories, internalizing these stories, even believing these stories makes us function psychologically in a way that is better than we would function if we did not believe these myths or reflect on these myths or internalize these myths. So the issue is not, are they true, but are they useful? And that's a shift philosophically from metaphysical realism to pragmatism, as we say. Truth, we set it aside. Maybe there's some truth, but who really cares? Does it work? Does it do good stuff for the individual psychologically? Now, many traditional paleoconservatives have loved Jordan Peterson for lots of reasons, but then they start to listen to this narrative language and they come to him and they say, yeah, but the Bible is true, right? Right, Jordan? Right? And they'll push him on this. Right? And of course, the people who are not religious also are saying, wait, are you saying that they're just made up stories that happen to push our buttons psychologically, Jordan? Or are you saying that they really are true? Let's be clear. And the clearest thing that Jordan has ever said is this formulation here, there's the URL, is I act as if God exists. So I'm not saying that God exists, but if I think that God exists or imagine that there's a God out there, I'm going to act a certain way. And perhaps more specifically with respect to morality, if I don't think there's a God watching over me, I'm going to act this way, but if I think there's a God watching over me, I'm going to act this way. And this is the better way to act. So therefore, having this as if belief in God is psychologically useful for me. I'm going to be a better person as a result of my religion. Now, closely related, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a great hero of mine, I imagine a great hero of everyone, someone who was raised in a strict Muslim background, suffered some of the worst things that can happen to little girls and young women. Yeah. She recently converted to conservatism, and her argument was partly that it makes her able to function better in the world if she believes. But her argument was a variation on that. I'm now a Christian because atheism can't equip us for the civilizational war that we are functioning. So the question is not whether theism is true or atheism is true, but if we have a society of atheists, are we going to be able to stand up to what, in her judgment, is the most destructive force operative in world politics now, Islamism? And her answer is no. Only strong religion culturally can stand up to another strong religion culturally. And for better or for worse, in the West, that has to be Christianity, so I have converted to this particular religion. Now notice again, this is not to say that Christianity she thinks is true, and when you read her piece, you don't find that she's interested in developing arguments for the truth of Christianity. It is a pragmatic social usefulness argument that she is making. Atheism is too weak and too divisive a doctrine to fortify us against our menacing foes. James Orr, professor of philosophy at Cambridge University, chairman in the United Kingdom of the National Conservative Movement, a big shot recently in intellectual conservatism. A very pragmatic kind of conservative. Now, I did a debate with him in London a couple of years ago. I think it's almost a couple of years ago. And we followed it up with a three-part written exchange that's much more academic and formal, point, counterpoint. You can find that in Reasoned Papers if you are interested in it. But just a couple of points about Orr's powerful and influential defense of conservatism. Right? Well, we're not going to define conservatism, he says. Right? And conservatives are just not into definitions. What exactly are our principles? Why are they true? What are their defining necessary and sufficient conditions? And so forth. A crisply distilled ideological schema that purports to be applicable to all people at all times and in all places disturbs. So that's wrong. Don't think that there is such a thing as a philosophy or a set of political principles that applies to everyone. There's a kind of relativism lurking there. Instead, the conservatives' instinct, particular over the universal, empirical over the rational, concrete over the abstract, pragmatic over the ideal. So, he's a professor of philosophy at Cambridge, very well-educated guy. So what he's saying, it's an instinct for the particular, the empirical, the concrete, and the pragmatic. What's wrong in doing politics is anything that tries to be universalistic, too rational, abstract, or idealistic. That's the philosophical contrast. And then some more language here, adding this to the instinct language. Conservatism is a set of habits, impulses. It's a temperament. So we're in a different cognitive, emotional space defending conservatism here. Conservatism is about order. And then notice this very strong claim here. Who are our big enemies? Not the socialists and the communists. The worst enemies are the anarchists and the libertarians. They believe in freedom as fundamental, right? Even to the point of being willing to not have a government because the government is too much about giving orders to people. Those are the enemies of the conservatives. I'm going to wait for. Finally, this will be my last point here. Roger Scruton, who I think is the deepest philosophically of all of these individuals, which is why his name is known the world over, published he died just a couple of years ago. But notice, I'll excerpt a couple of points here. What is conservatism about? Now, Scruton is great as a critic of the left, very perceptive, very sharp, does his homework. When he turns to saying what he is in favor of, it's not freedom. Conservatism is not about freedom. He repeats that so many times. It's about authority. You are born subject to authority. That is fundamental. If you are allowed freedom along the way, we might be able to make some arguments, but some preconditions have to be in place. We have to have a certain kind of moral order, cultural order, political order. You find your place within that order. Well, what makes that order? What kind of order are we talking about? Conservatism, as I describe it, involves the attempt to perpetuate a social organism. Now, the language here is important. When a philosopher uses the word organism, they mean something very specific. So when we talk about a society, what is a society? Well, one thing is to say a society is made up of individuals, but the individuals are the reality, and they come together for various purposes jointly, and they create social institutions. Maybe a church, or a synagogue, or a sports team, or a business organization, or a family, or a friendship. But it's individuals making up the social unit, And if the social unit isn't doing what it's supposed to do, then it breaks up and the individuals go their separate ways. Scruton is saying that is absolutely the wrong way to think about societies. Societies literally are an organism. The individual is parallel to a cell in that organism. So in his case, English culture, or more broadly speaking, British culture, is all of these people who are unified into a literally living thing that has a history, has a development, it grows, it shrinks, it has problems, and we want to perpetuate this organism the way it is, its mode of living into the future. And you as an individual have your place in that order to help that organism carry on its way. Again, we're not going to be too rational about this. Conservatism may rarely announce itself in maxims, formula, or aims. Its essence is inarticulate, something you feel, partly because you're born into a social organism. It makes you who you are, gives you your identity, your purpose, and most of us can't really articulate what it is that makes me be the kind of person I am with all of my identities. When you push us, we're skeptical. We're skeptical about all general claims, universal claims, including the claims that those liberals are going to be emphasizing. I shall characterize in this book the principal enemy of conservatism, the philosophy of liberalism. And when he means liberalism's philosophy, he means the one that we've just spent the first half of this session talking about. That's the enemy. With all its attending trappings of individual autonomy, individuals, especially autonomous individuals, wrong philosophically, wrong morally, not to be allowed within the system. And the idea of natural rights, we don't believe in those at all. There are no rights. You have privileges, beings, responsibilities, duties, privileges according to your place in the social organism. Now, the point of this whirlwind condensed tour is to say these are four of the most famous new conservatives. They're all very philosophical, but they're not like the paleo-conservatives. And this is what we need to be focusing our attention on, of course, as well as carrying on the battle with the left. But I think it's the conservatives now who are resurgence. They deserve our close attention as well. And I'll stop there. All right.